Warning, listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. Think about this. Close your eyes and see if you can picture yourself in one of these situations. You're giving a presentation. You're on fire with a new solution. It's right up your alley. You know it will jumpstart a project, open a door, break up a logjam. But when you share it, you're met with polite, non-committal, or worse yet, blank stares. Or you're in a conversation that seems to be going nowhere. And suddenly one of you says, "Did you ever?" or "Remember when?" All of a sudden a spark flickers and cooperation begins. You know, there's times when things just click and sometimes they just don't. And often the big difference is telling or hearing a story. Stories define us. Stories unite us. They cement friendships, galvanize audiences, motivate employees, and increase productivity. They make the impossible plausible. They can make grief bearable, and they can make joy contagious. Well, my guest today is Michale Gabriel. She is the founder of Story by Design and a powerful motivational speaker and coach. Michale has been defining, refining, and sharing mesmerizing stories for more than 30 years. And she's helping educators, students, community leaders, charities, and corporations discover new ways to listen deeply, engage employees, build effective teams, and discover hidden potential and develop authentic leadership skills. Michale Gabriel, welcome to Influencers Radio.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's so good to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on because listening to a speaker, listening to a good storyteller, to me is like listening to a symphony. And I'm really just always, the word mesmerize comes up when people talk about Michale Gabriel. And I think that's what it is. It can be mesmerizing. So I think the best way to kick this off is I want to hear your story and how you got started with all of this.
Well, I'll do that. So, Jack, I would need to go back, way back. With my childhood, I was born and raised in Alaska. I'm a third-generation Alaskan, and I grew up listening to stories and reading stories and being captivated by them, but never would have thought during all those years that I would end up with a business where I was storytelling and teaching storytelling around the world, which is what I've done over the last, it's actually 38 years now. But I had been a director of Children's Library Services. I had been a director of a $2.8 million campaign for the University of Washington School of International Studies when I had one morning, it was doing having a meditation in my backyard. And all of a sudden, I saw in my imagination, in my mind's eye, a globe with hands underneath it, folding it up. And the words over the top were peace through story. And those words were so powerful for me, Jack, that we just finished the campaign and raised our goal. And I knew my calling was to step out into the world and bring about peace through storytelling. That was 38 years ago. And I, at the time, had no idea. I had no strategy, no plan. I just knew that it was something that I needed to do. And it was not without challenge because I was married at the time. We had made decisions based on two incomes. So my spouse was not very happy with that decision, but I knew it was something that I needed to do. And I couldn't have imagined then that it would have taken me across the United States, storytelling in schools and teaching teachers how to tell stories and doing school residencies. I wouldn't have imagined that it would have taken me to the former Soviet Union for the purpose of building bridges between our cultures through storytelling, but it did, or places like Iraq or Uganda. I wouldn't have imagined that it would have taken me to a hospital setting where I had an opportunity I founded the storytelling residency program at Children's Hospital in Seattle and used storytelling as a way to bring comfort and hope and solace and care and love to children who were critically, chronically, and terminally ill. And then about 23 years ago, I wouldn't have imagined in the beginning that it would have brought me into the corporate sector, teaching leaders how to communicate with meaning through storytelling, but indeed it has.
Well, to me, like I said, storytelling it's an art, but it's a unique art in which, when you're painting, you're painting on the canvas of someone's mind, and they may see something completely different than the person sitting next to them, telling that story.
Yes.
But what's fascinating to me is, you talk about 38 years ago. Now, in the last 5-10 years, we've heard more about storytelling, especially, once the corporate world got a hold of that concept. But I can imagine when you're talking 38 years ago, what people would have said when you said, "Oh, well, what kind of business are you going to go into?" I'm going to tell stories.
That's so true. And at that time, Jack, there was no funding within a school district to fund this type of thing. So honestly, in the beginning, for some years, my fee for going in and performing, doing 4 or 5 performances in a school, was being paid for by the PTA fund, by the bake sale. I mean, that's what it was in those early years, and so it really, I just think sometimes when life calls you to something, that you just need to listen and to go and do it. But one of the things that I was recalling, there was a teacher in one of my teacher workshops, and a 3rd grade teacher. And so the class took place over several weeks. And so he said to his students one day, he said, would you like me to tell you a story or read you a story today? And the children said, oh, we want you to tell us a story. Tell us a story. And he said, well, why would you rather I tell you a story rather than read you a story? And one of those children raised his hand and he said, because when you tell us a story, we get to see into your eyes. And when you think about that, isn't that powerful? We can see into your eyes. And that is exactly what happens when we can connect through the eyes, through our voice, through our ability to, and you said it earlier, Jack, and you're absolutely right. Storytelling is all about painting pictures with your words and then bringing the emotion alongside it. And what you're trying to do always is to get the listener to imagine that story for themselves. Because the more that you can activate the imagination of the listener, it allows them access to the story that you're telling. And for many, many years, and thousands upon thousands of children that I connected with over, around the world, actually, one of the things that one of the elements I actually bring to my work with adults is that asking myself the question, how can I tell this story? Because I wasn't reading, I was recasting stories from literature, though, and through storytelling. And my goal always was, how can I tell this story in a way that activates the imagination of the child so that that they can retain the story and, in fact, pass it on to others? So at the end of the day, when I would be putting my books into the trunk of my car, and I would hear children across the schoolyard saying, Mom, the storyteller Michale came today, and she told us a story about, and then I would hear the child launch into the story, then I knew that I had done my job because the story was sticking. And so then the next question that has to be asked, and I talk about this with leaders all the time, are we telling stories worthy of sticking in someone's imagination, sticking to someone? You see, are there stories that are profound or transformative or worthy of us retaining them? Because to the extent that we can retain a story, it has the capacity to transform us, to move us, to inspire us, and to motivate us to take whatever action or to just create more understanding of ourselves and our own lives. Because a story you tell, we always hope, will beget, will inspire, will activate a memory within the listener so that they leave that experience really more connected to their own story because of what they've heard.
And, to be able to break it down like that is, just tremendously valuable because I think a lot of people listen to stories and probably there's a lot of people that, it ends with entertainment. Well, that was entertaining. But one thing that you did, and I think that you were probably, a pioneer in this area, is understanding how a story can go beyond entertainment and merge that into organizations. How did you, figure that out, or what was that moment when you realized that stories can go beyond, entertaining children and really go into building solid foundations and bringing together and strengthening organizations?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that, let me share this with you. I was doing some keynotes because I've told a lot of people's stories. And, this is important because when you tell stories from literature, you need to literally take them inside of your being. And when you share them, it's as if you're living the story. So it has to come inside of you and then be shared out of you. Yes. So I was asked to do a keynote for the Boeing company, and it was at their Seattle headquarters, and it was for a launch for a capital campaign, or not a capital, a United Way campaign that was raising money from employees for United Way agencies across the enterprise. And the campaign goal that year was $26 million. So I was asked to come in, and I would have a room full of 200 senior VPs, including the CEO of the company at the time. And I was to deliver something that would somehow move people in that audience to give the boosters who were going out raising the money and so on, give them all the support, the resources that they needed. And many of those in the room had made that kind of commitment, but there were those who hadn't. And so I shared 4 stories. The first story had to do with working together. It was a tale from the Skagit people of Puget Sound. The second story was a personal story about a woman who had made it possible for me to apply and receive a scholarship to go on to graduate school. The third story was about an Boeing employee who had been with them 17 years, but had only learned how to read and write 3 years before through an adult literacy program. And he gave me permission to tell his story. So I had spent about 4 hours with him, gathering the story from him so I could retell it from the stage. The fourth story was about what goes around comes around. And when I finished, I said to everyone, this is not a campaign about $26 million. It is not. It is a campaign about 100,000 new stories that are about to be told because of what you at the Boeing company are about to do. And then the CEO had 10 minutes to finish, and he got up and he said, this was Phil Condit, he got up and he said, when everything is said that needs to be said, nothing more needs to be added. Have a wonderful campaign, everyone. And then he came and sat down and he leaned over to me and he said, Michale, he said, I didn't want to break the spell you cast. And so, and many wonderful things happened out of that. There was a huge shift for a lot of folks in that room. But about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call. And this woman said to me, are you that storyteller that makes grown men cry? And I said, well, yes, I think that would be me. And she said, can you teach us how to talk like you? And I said, you mean how to make people cry? She said, I keep hearing from everyone that when you speak, people's hearts are opened. And as leaders, we need to learn how to do that. And is that something you could teach? And I said, yes, it is. And that's what's brought me into the Boeing company 23 years ago, standing up 3 leadership programs and literally training thousands upon thousands of leaders.
And, that's no small company to get started with.
No, it's not.
Doing this. And I can tell you, I think it's quite astute of that. Who was it that closed out the?
You mean the CEO? Yes, Joe Condit. He was the CEO of the company at the time. Yes, president.
For him to recognize that.
Yes, it was. I was
going to say, it reminds you of that saying that perfection isn't when there's nothing left to add; it's when there's nothing left to take away.
Oh wow!
And for him to recognize that, and also puts a spotlight on how powerful that story is, because what you did pretty much moved people for them to hit that fundraising goal to do that. It's just remarkable.
Well, the one story that was of one of their own employees who gave me permission to tell a story, which is a huge gift, and a huge responsibility when you're telling someone's story from the front of the room. And in this case, he was sitting in the audience. And when I finished his story, I had them lift the lights, and he stood up, holding the hand of the diminutive grandmother who taught him how to read and write from Hamlin Robinson School in Seattle. And it just, there was such, because I could see grown men, wiping their eyes through that story, because so many males especially suffer from dyslexia, yes, or ADD. And when I sat back down, the gentleman that was the campaign chair for all of King County said to me with tears in his eyes, "You told my story," he said, "and the story of 2 of my sons." And he had never talked about his dyslexia publicly, but the next day when he was addressing all of the chairs of the heads of the United Way agencies at a meeting, he actually not only told the stories I had told the day before, he'd shared with them, but he also told his own story. And because he was a newspaper publisher, he actually, within 3 weeks, their stories were appearing about dyslexia. And that just continued. So that's the power of this, when someone says something that moves us. And over the years, I've coached individual leaders and telling their own organizational stories where they've made a huge shift from a printed, standing at a printing machine, running off copies, to offering their services through the portal. And I remembered working with one gentleman that it was really hard for him. He was one of those be bold, be brief, and be gone kinds of people. And I said, the whole point of your story that we're taking to the leadership team, the vice president, the leadership team, I said, is about people. And so in order for your story to have meaning, we need to show the individual contributions of the different people in your organization through the story you're telling. And so we began that process of unearthing all of that rich detail. And later he said to me, Michelle, the most transformed person in all of this, he said, was me. Because by telling the story of our journey of the last 5 years, it helped me to value my employees and to really understand their unique contributions in a way I couldn't have understood if I hadn't been put in the position of telling the story of our transformation.
Yeah, that is incredibly powerful. So there's so many facets of this that I want to tackle today. And so
Sure.
I can see from, what you've said so far that these stories, as far as organization is concerned, one can impact their organization internally. And clearly it has impact on community. It sounds like what you're doing when you get people to reveal their emotions, or they reveal like these people that with the learning disabilities, and that all of a sudden are able to open it and share it, and that unfolds into, helping probably thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of others. It sounds like it all comes down to trust. There's a element of trust that is built with this. So can you give an example on how these stories really impact building trust in organizations?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Jack, because you're absolutely right. I can't trust someone unless I feel like I know them. And what happens is that oftentimes we don't provide enough of ourselves and our backstory so that people can relate to us, connect with us, discover what values we may have in common. And when I began to share more of myself and my journey or my backstory, it allows people to begin to trust what's coming out of our mouth. It so often we'll say in an organization, for example, we might work on a people vision and we craft and wordsmith the words just like so, and then we put those on a wall inside of a conference room, or we flash them up on the screen before we start a meeting, and we think that's going to impact the culture, and it doesn't. What impacts the culture are stories. So when I sit with people, I ask them, what are you trying to achieve here? And what are the things that really matter to you? And what is important for people to understand about you that would enable you to do what you do? And let me give you a quick example. I was in a workshop, and the gentleman was talking about process improvement. And he had, 75 slides that he was going through. And the people sitting there were checking out, their eyes were rolling. They were obviously not paying attention. And I was having trouble tracking because this was new language for me. I came from education, international diplomacy, and healthcare. So a lot of this was very new to me. But people were just not connecting to this man's message. And so I raised my hand and I said, could you just give us an example of what that looks like? So he proceeded to tell a story about being out on the factory floor and the process or step that these folks were following, a group of people, was that they needed to check the rivets and make sure they were securely fastened in the interior of the plane, which they did. And then it continued down the moving line. And the next group of folks, the process step said, put down the pad for the carpet. And those people did that. And then the plane continued down the line, and the next process step said, put down the carpet, and it did. And then it continued on down the line, he said, and then the process step said, check rivets, make sure they are securely fastened. And what did that group do? They ripped up the carpet, they ripped up the pad, and checked the rivets. And he said, the problem is we're so focused on the singular task or the work in front of us that we don't think to step back and ask ourselves, what's the flow here? Is something out of order? And he said, that is what we need to do. We need to ask ourselves, I'm just one part here, but what's the bigger picture, and does this fit? And he said that with so much conviction and passion that I asked another question. I said, as you're talking about this, it's very clear this is extremely important to you. And I said, where does that come from in you? And he paused, because that was not a question that he was accustomed to being asked, right? So he paused for a moment. And then he said, when I was a child, I loved to build things. I built shelves and tables. I loved building things so much that my parents gave me my own tool belt. And I had a hammer and I had a screwdriver. And he said, and I loved doing that. And as an adult, I build wooden boats. So when I'm not spending these long days at Boeing talking about process improvement, you'll find me in my workshop building a boat. And then he paused again. And he held his hands up in front of him, and he looked out at all of us, and he said, I value what a person does with their hands. And when I see someone's work being undone because the process is broken, that is not okay with me. Well, whew.
Oh. It just gives so much weight, so much weight to his words.
Totally. Exactly.
The brevity of what he was saying before, or I guess almost sterile way he was telling it before, but that story just all of a sudden just gave so much weight and humanity to what he was trying, the point he was trying to get across.
Exactly. And, if you think about it, Jack, because at the time there was all this conversation, we're doing process improvement because then we're going to lose our jobs and blah, 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 da, da, da. That powerful story was out there. But what he gave us that day was an opportunity to look at an improvement in a process as a way of allowing you to go home at the end of the night and me to go home at the end of the day and saying, I did something of value today. I contributed something of value and I furthered something along today. And what he offered us was another way of looking at what some people hold a story, another way of looking at something that countered that story that was out there, which said the only reason we're doing this is so that we can eliminate jobs. No, the reason we're doing this is so that every single human being can contribute and use the work of their hands and their minds in contributing to the improvement, to the quality, to the delivery of something important. And we can go home at the end of the day and feel better about ourselves and what we've just spent the last 8-10 hours doing.
Well, I have to say, in the short time we've been talking, I mean, you've certainly demonstrated the power just in the stories that you've been telling. So I'd like to get into a little bit deeper into some of this, because what it sounds like to me is a lot of people think storytelling is an art, but it sounds like there's as much science behind it as much as there's an art to it. And to me, it's remarkable that you have been able to develop a method for it to be teachable, which you've clearly been able to do. So let's talk about some of those misconceptions, because I think a lot of people, when they are giving presentations or they're starting to, or they think they're telling a story, it's filled with platitudes and just words that completely escape the audience. So how do you merge that? How do you balance, brevity with deeper meaning or pulling those emotions out? Or I guess maybe a better way for you to kind of just open up on this is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have around being able to tell stories that have that weight to them for what you just demonstrated?
Wow. I'm so glad you asked me that question. And it reminds me that when I first entered the corporate world and later years too, people would say to me, "Oh, you're the storyteller. You're going to help us put a spin on a story?" And my response then, as it is now, is no, actually not. In fact, the folks who work for you are very smart. And if they get the feeling that you're putting a spin on something and it's not authentic and it's not genuine, that the person who's going to lose out in that transaction is you, because now they're not going to be able to trust you. So my role here is to help you find your personal connection to every message that you deliver. And if through our work together you cannot find your connection to a message that you're delivering, then your organization and you as a leader are better served having someone else deliver that message. and that is what it comes down to. When I work with people, I listen and I ask a lot of questions around so that I can unearth their own values, Jack, because our values, when we speak from the place of our values, what we hold dear, that is where the power comes in. You see, that's where we have the ability to truly impact another person's life. And so when I work with leaders, it's let's talk about what matters to you. And then once we identify those values and what matters to you and what what you're about. And so I gather information about their backgrounds and so on. And then we ask ourselves, what messages, what stories would serve you and serve your organization if we were to work on those? And then, like anything, oftentimes, Jack, we have a thread of a story, but we don't really know its potential until we start speaking it. And to where it's really the listener who gentles the story out of the teller. Meaning, if you feel that you're being deeply listened to by another human being, you are more likely to open up and to share more of yourself. And when you do that, the beneficiary is the listener, because we're able to get more of that teller. Does that make sense when I say that?
It does. And it sounds like, and I think a lot of people, it would be overlooked or neglected. And it sounds like that the whole process of extracting that information from an organization is critical to being able to telling their story. So It sounds to me that like listening is just, almost if not equally as important as the ability to tell that story.
Yeah.
What is that impact? What is the importance of listening first before you get into the telling?
That's right.
Part of it.
And sometimes we have a story, Jack, that it has great potential, but we don't even know it because we are living our lives. So when a listener can reflect back to us, my gosh, when I heard you say that reminded me of, or that really caused me to feel this or that about you. I was just doing a workshop in Seattle for a client, and I had worked with her for several months on her story to share with her team. And of course, going through COVID, all of these things. And she had suffered, as so many of us do, from imposter syndrome. And in each of our sessions, at the end of the session, I would reflect back to her what I was hearing from her story. And as I was sharing this back to her, it was like she was hearing her story really for the first time. And she began to see in the telling of her story that through COVID, she had been able to release from herself that idea that she might have been an imposter, that she truly was the president and leader of this organization. She didn't found it. She wasn't the founder, but she had taken it so much further as a result of her leadership. And I was able to listen to her on several podcasts. She was invited to be a guest, and I would get back to her and say, I am hearing so much more strength from you, so much more ownership of yourself and of your story. And then when she shared it with her team in Seattle, I facilitated the conversation after, and the feedback from her own team was amazing, because they said, gosh, to look at you, I would never have thought you would have struggled with the idea that you were not enough, or that, hiring a woman in a mostly male-dominated profession was just, as what someone said to you, I'm hiring you as an experiment, nothing more. And all of these things that people were sharing with her, what it did is it opened them up to be able to share more deeply of themselves because of what she had done in creating that space for authenticity and truth and integrity to show up, so that people could show up in the fullness of who they are, in the fullness of what they have to offer, and access their own wisdom. And when we create a space for that to happen, then we all are the beneficiaries, because we learn from each other's lives, and that in fact informs and impacts our own.
It must be just tremendously fulfilling to you to witness the moment someone has that realization that their own experience, their own story has the ability to impact others in that way. You talked about the imposter syndrome. I think there's so many people that underestimate the the power of their experience or what they could share. Do you find that to be the case? So when you're talking to someone, how many people begin with, oh, I don't think I'd be a good storyteller. I really don't have much to say. Or even, I don't have that great vocabulary. Yes. Or something tells me that it's more substance over form when it comes to that. Would that be the case?
Yes. I cannot tell you how many people in the leadership programs that I've had the privilege of being a part of, 3 different ones, gold standard programs, including one in India. And I always get this, Jack. People say to me, I don't know that I have a story, or I wasn't a boat person coming from Vietnam, or I didn't experience, a terrible childhood, or whatever else. Nothing dramatic. And I always say to folks, or my wife is a storyteller, in the family, not me. I've heard it all. And I say every single person has a story to tell. And in indigenous cultures, which I've studied at length, their belief is that every single person has medicine to share with the collective. And that what we need to do is to create an environment where every single person's wisdom and medicine is allowed to be brought forward. And one of the beautiful things, and this happens in my workshops too, is that a person is given the opportunity to tell their story without interruption so that they can actually get to the end of it without being interrupted, right? So that too, but often when I'm with people and they'll say, I don't think I have a story to tell, and then I'll start to ask them questions, and that who they are just begins to come forward. And then it's my job as a coach to help them to see the potential of the story that's being unearthed. It comes over time. And then it's a matter of crafting it. So that's where the art part comes in, because what happens sometimes is we have so much story we want to tell, or we put so much into it, or we end up spinning in certain sections, and we end up losing the listener. And so part of it is identifying the deeper story that needs to be told, lifting it up, and then it's better if you have, let's say, 10 minutes to highlight 2 or 3 key moments for the listener to experience in real time so that they can step into your story with you, than to share 10 moments and do them in such a superficial way that the listener is never allowed access. Their imagination is never activated. They're not co-creating it with you. And so part of this process is to identify the key moments and then to elevate those, and then to tell them both with emotion and with word images, paint pictures so that the listener can engage. For example, if I were to say to you something like, gosh, I had a great relationship with my grandfather. We had such a marvelous time together. He loved me so much. And we talk like this all the time, right? Well, that's one way to say it, but it doesn't evoke images. But if I were to say to you, when I was young in the mountains, my grandfather used to come home at night covered with the black dust of the coal mine. Only his lips were clean, and he used them to kiss the top of my head.
I hear Hemingway in a female voice when you say that.
Well, that's a compliment. Thank you. That actually is a line from a book which is called When I Was Young in the Mountains. But you see, I've used the same amount of airtime. But in the one case, I was using language that didn't paint pictures. And in the second, I showed you my grandfather's love for me, you see, through that imagery.
Yeah.
So we always say, don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me, show me.
And to be able to sit with someone and teach them. I mean, to me, that's got to be harder than teaching someone a musical instrument, it seems like, to be able to, put together words that paint those kind of stories. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you about the inverse of that, because I'm sure that there's people out there that think they have their story, mm-hmm. and they have a lot of words that they string together, mm-hmm. that don't necessarily tell anything? Do you ever have people that say, well, no, I got my story. Maybe you can help me put a little relish on it, but I got it. And then you really see that there's, you're saying a lot of words, but you're really saying nothing or not painting a picture. Yeah. Is that harder to almost undo than starting from someone that feels they can't?
Well, they both have their own set of challenges because words are only a part of it, Jack. There's your attitude toward yourself, toward the story that you're telling, toward and toward your audience. That's something we pick up on. There's movement. There's the tone of your voice. There's so many elements, that come into play. My experience is the more that I can help someone through guided imagery and other kinds of devices that I use to access their memory bank, where the story resides and the detail around that, and that begins to come forward, then the language follows. You see, the language follows, and so it's more a matter of unearthing that story and the detail, because storytelling is really the richness is in the detail of the language. But so the more that we're able to unearth that, and then to support someone in stepping into that moment and just reliving it in their mind, all kinds of things happen as a result. Their voice starts to change, their pacing and timing. It's not contrived. It's just natural. Their body starts to move. Things just start to happen, because they are in the moment of reliving that experience, but they're doing it in real time. So I always say to folks, don't worry about any of that. Let's work on unearthing the story first, and then get you into being in that moment and the telling, and then let's just see what happens as a result. And inevitably, that's exactly what happens. It's why I don't allow people to write or memorize story. It's a series of images that they're working from. And so the more that they can be present, because it's going to change with each telling, which is why when I do a process with people, I have them tell the story to people and then get feedback, tell it again, and the story just evolves. Whereas our tendency is to say, okay, I'm going to try to force feed it into this template, and I'm going to try to do this and that. I remembered years ago, I was attending a workshop, and it was around, it was about a person who was offering advice on how to craft your message so that you could get a standing ovation at the end. And I remember sitting there going, oh, no. I mean, I was livid. I was like, it felt so manipulated. And I think that, to go back to what you said earlier, Jack, it's sometimes we use words for the purpose of manipulation, and I'm very sensitive about that. I grew up in a household where there was emotional abuse, and a mother who suffered greatly from depression, 3 small children, trying to raise them on her own. And I, to survive, had to intuit what everyone else was feeling and thinking, but couldn't really tell you what I was feeling and thinking, because that isn't what I needed as a survival skill. And then as a freshman in college at Alaska Methodist University, my director, I was performing the role of Emily in Our Town, Thornton Wilder's Our Town, and he challenged me because of my communication with my stage father. He just kept saying, it's not authentic. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. We were in a rehearsal. And all of a sudden I exploded, which was not my nature. And I said to him, how can I relate to a stage father if I don't know what it's like to relate to a real father? And I started crying. And he sent everyone down to the cafeteria. We went in his office, and I said, Frank, this is my background. This is where I come from, and I've been told by my mother was suffering. So and we healed many years later. So this is not disparaging to her, but I was out there, Miss Anchorage, first runner-up to Miss Alaska, bringing all this fame to the family. But behind closed doors, I was being told I was worthless. That way, if anyone got to know me well, they would have nothing to do with me. And he said to me, that vulnerable person behind this facade is the person I cast in this role. And that is the person that I want to see on stage. And because of my own journey and finding my own voice over these many years, learning how to be an authentic human being and to speak openly and to speak honestly. Jack, that's why I do what I do, because I value every person's voice, and I want to create an environment where their honest and authentic voice can be heard and valued by those around them. So in other words, the deepest wounding we have in life is often the greatest teacher to help us to help others.
Well, I think, your ability to do that is just remarkable. And I'm sure you have to realize it, that your cadence, everything it's a song, what you're doing as you're telling these stories as you speak. And so what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit on the tactical about what people would expect when they engage you to do this, because to me, it's still just beyond my comprehension, the teachability of this, because I'm listening to your cadence, and it's not like you would say, all right, here's the 4 cadences to choose from, because it has to be unique to everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would someone expect if they engage you? Because I know you say you coach people, but to me, I mean, what it sounds like you bring out of people, you're coach / muse almost. Right?
Bless your heart. So, Doc, as I said, I've been doing this for 38 years, but it goes way back. Yes. So for me, when I'm working with people, we take a look at when they contact me. Often it's because they have a presentation to give, or because they're expanding on their businesses. They're starting to hire new people. They're recognizing that there's a culture that they want to create, and they want to do their part as leaders to influence and shape that culture. And they begin to understand that the thing that's going to do that, because people connect with story, is their ability to be able to speak about those aspects of their culture effectively and to draw those stories out of others. So it's usually a need or a recognition that as a leader, I want to be an effective storyteller. I want to be that because I want people to connect with me. I want to build trust. I want to be transparent in the way that I communicate. And I want to be able to share enough of myself so that people get a sense of who I am, what we're about as a company, what my vision is. And then I want others in my organization to be able to share themselves, so that as a leader, I can recognize the strengths, the capacities of the people who work for me, and the stories that are a part of who they are, so that we can harness all of that talent and move it forward. So I work with people one-on-one through that coaching process. And it's usually sometimes if I have a story that I want to tell on a TEDx talk or on platform, a personal story, or that's one type. Another one would be I'm a leader of an organization, and I want to be able to more authentically, share myself with my teams, with my organization, and so on. So depending on the outcome, then I lay out a plan. It's very customized. I work in a very artisan way, a boutique way. We talk about how, what it will look like and what we need to do in order to achieve that objective. So it's very much driven by the outcome. And then it's one-on-one sessions, or it could be a small group session. Now that we're working more digitally, and this is a whole new thing for me, Jack, this whole idea of, for 5 years, I've been asked would I teach, courses online, and I kept saying no. And now, the universe is inviting me to rethink that, which indeed I am, which is why I connected with Inspired Living TV and Carrie Murphy to help me with this process. But anyway, they come, and whatever their goal is, then we set the work in relation to that. In other words, I don't work in a cookie cutter fashion. And my commitment is for my clients to get what they need in order to go out and more successfully share themselves with others. I'm not sure that I answered your question.
Your answers are not just answers, they're demonstrations. You get to witness the process of what you're explaining. And it's not that you're using huge words, you're speaking a very plain language. And when I was kind of talking about earlier, people that try to sound more important, or, with the platitudes and things like that. I think what you do, it's almost the reverse. It requires the ability to speak in plain language, but also, what's behind your words is believability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm starting to feel like that's built into your process of what you're teaching people. Mm-hmm. It's almost a way of simplifying what you're saying, but putting power and emotion behind what you're saying. And it just truly is remarkable. That's why I encourage someone to listen to this multiple times and just listen to it at different levels, because there's so much to this. It just truly is remarkable. I mean, I'll listen to it multiple times.
Bless your heart. But there are some techniques. By that I mean there are ways that we can shape a story. We need to have a good opening. We need to know what the ending is. Sometimes we get to the end of the story and we just keep talking. So what's important is that every sentence that comes out of our mouth should further the story along. And this is where a listener can be very helpful in giving feedback, because if the listener is already on to the next scene, but we're still on the previous one in our telling, then we need to make a shift in the way in which we're sharing it, because our intention always is to keep pace with the listener, not to go too fast, not to go too slow, so that they can stay with us, so that the impact of the story has the potential, to be expressed. I always say, if you have some key points you want to make, let's wrap the most compelling story we can find around that point. Let the story make the point. Let the listener make that point, and as they're hearing it, before you ever say it at the very end, because that means now that there's ownership on the part of the listener, and the chances of that message sticking are greatly increased.
And that brings something up, because you talked about how people that think that in order to get this, I need to memorize it, and I needed to get the words, wordsmith it, but the way you explained it, a story is really a living, kind of breathing thing that can change and alter, and it's some of that have to do with feedback that you get from the audience, like real-time feedback. Yeah. And if so, how can that be replicated or mitigated in a virtual, because we are in the position where we're doing more and more things virtually. But how important is that for you to be seeing your audience as you're telling that story, so that you can get that feedback and know whether you're moving at the right pace, or you're being as impactful as you could be?
So that's a real challenge. It's a challenge, but a couple things come to mind. Number one, if we have a chance to practice a story, with someone, and get before we actually deliver it, let's say in a meeting. Even working virtually for years, before we even had the benefit of the camera, we didn't have Zoom. Then it was all in the voice. And I would say to folks that I was coaching, if in delivering this message, you're more comfortable in standing up and putting a headset on and moving about so that you can connect more with your message, then do it that way. Because oftentimes you'd hear people talk and it was just flatlined. A lot of it too, because we were so focused on PowerPoint. So that's one thing. The other thing is that no, you can't really look at the faces. So what you have to do is to trust your story that you're telling, and to wait for that feedback, which will come. And in a Zoom environment, the most important thing is to look directly into that camera on your laptop or whatever device you're using. Look directly in it and imagine the people in the room on the other side, that they're listening to you, and connect with them. That is the most powerful thing we can do in a virtual environment. But I will tell you that when you are present in your own story, people, whether they can see us or not, they're still connecting with the messaging because they're connecting with the fact that you are aligned outside and inside with the story that you're telling. I'm reminded of a gentleman that was in a workshop of mine, told a story for the first time ever about his fear of flying, which working for an airplane company, was risky to share that, and what he had gone through, and how he had to tell his boss one day because he said, no, you're going to go to St. Louis and be with the customer, because he would go in and change his calendar saying he was on vacation during days when he was supposed to fly. And it's an incredible story about taking a class and taking a trip to Portland, and this woman sitting next to him holding onto his arm, and her nails were, bringing blood onto the surface of his skin. And then he finally took, but what motivated him to finally address this fear was when he had taken a workshop which said that the amount of energy that you're spending in hiding a part of yourself from others is impacting your ability to be a good leader, a good parent, a good spouse. And he decided to take that to heart. And so I said to him, Tom, would you be willing to tell this story to this leadership team that I was bringing people in to tell their stories every month to the vice president and his direct reports? And he said, oops, because there were people in the room that he'd worked for. And he said, okay, fine, I will. So he tells this story, and I mean, it was captivating, all the pieces of it. We'd worked on it. It was really powerful. But that afternoon, he got a phone call from somebody who was not in the room. He was listening on the phone to this meeting. And he said, Tom, your story impacted me so much today. He said, I now realize that something in my life that I've been shaming and hiding and not wanting to reveal, I had no idea until you told your story how much that is impacting me and my ability to be a manager and a good leader and a husband and a father. You have given me the courage through your story to face this thing that I have not been willing to face all these many years. Well, he told the story in a room. This person was listening via telecom, and yet he got it. He got the power of the message. How does that happen? Because if you are present in your own story and you're telling from a place on the inside out, a place of your authentic self, you will have an impact no matter what environment you're in.
It's just, it makes me almost speechless, because it seems like such quick transformations. Storytelling from the outside, I think a lot of people have a very shallow, maybe understanding or even perception of storytelling, but clearly, I think what you put together is this potion, I guess, of a little bit of linguistics and a little bit of anthropology, and because you really have to, it seems like a deeper understanding of not just your story, but who you're telling the story to, and the way you're telling it. How would someone find out more about Michale Gabriel and engaging you, or finding out more about how to get involved in what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to hear from any of your listeners. That would be very, very special. And actually, I'm in the midst of launching my new website, which is Michale Gabriel, Michale, Gabriel, Gabriel.com. MichaleGabriel.com is the new website. It's also storybydesign.net. But anyway, MichaleGabriel.com. And then I have an artisan story guide that I've prepared along with videos. So when you sign up, then you'll be receiving those videos, as well as my artisan story guide to help you start the process of unearthing your own story. So I'm very much hoping that your listeners will take advantage of that and go to MichaleGabriel.com and to sign up for that artisan story guide. And there's also an opportunity there that there's a contact page. And so I would be delighted to hear from you and to have a conversation around what your need is and how Story by Design can help. And then if I can add one more thing, Jack, this is a very important year for me. Should I tell you why?
I would love to hear why.
Well, in June, I celebrated my 75th birthday.
My goodness.
And so I've been at this for a very long time. And one of the beautiful things about one of the gifts of COVID for me, and there's been devastation all around, but it's also what is the growth opportunity here? What is the opportunity here to slow down, to pay attention to each other, to our climate, to our planet, to to being of service to others. And when you're this age, and is for me, I have more years behind me than I do in front of me. And so for me, it's the opportunity to work with people in a meaningful way, knowing that when they learn this skill, when they begin to see their own stories and elicit stories from others, that together we can create the world, the story going forward. And we have such an opportunity here right now to create a new story for ourselves, for our communities, for our country, for the world. The time is now. And I think part of this process is identifying what our current story is and owning it and celebrating it. And then collectively asking ourselves the question, and what do we want the story to be going forward? So for me, every person I work with, every opportunity that comes my way, I consider it as a gift, as part of my own legacy, to be able to create an environment and a world where everyone's voice matters. Because if we go back 38 years ago to that globe in those hands, and I remember when I first went to the Soviet Union, I made 9 trips there using storytelling as a tool of international diplomacy and bringing our country together. Well, we need to bring ourselves together. That's what I've come to learn. It's coming to peace with our own story, with one another's story, and then asking the question, and what story do we want to create? Because we are creators by definition as human beings. We have the power to always create something new. And for me at age 75, that's my current commitment. That's really what I want for me and for everyone that I serve.
Well, it's remarkable, and I think it's certainly something that you're more than capable of achieving and helping other people achieve. And I truly do consider you an influencer in this field, and not just an influencer, pioneer in this field. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing this
thank you.
with us today. It's tremendous. And I think for the listeners out there, any of you that listen to me on a regular basis, it's rare that I'm, caught off guard, but, it's almost hypnotic, listening to you and your story. So it really is a tremendous privilege having you on today. So thank you again.
So I have to say one more thing to you, my friend, Jack. You have asked such great questions, and you are a wonderful listener. I feel you across this phone wire, and I know when I'm being listened to. I know by virtue of the things that you've said, the things that you've noticed. And I have to say to you, you got a good interview because you are an excellent interviewer and an excellent listener. So you've been a gift to me today because you've allowed me and my voice to come forward by virtue of your listening and by virtue of your questions, the ease that you create, and just the things that you've observed, because you've sparked to me to, remember different things to share with you by virtue of just you being you. So you've been a gift to me today. And I really want you to hear that, because that's so important on these podcasts. That is a person coming on that you feel heard, and I feel heard by you. And I thank you for that. Well,
I thank you for saying that. It's something I would take pride in coming from you, certainly. I think a lot of people, if you're listening to this and you start listening to this because you think, maybe I'll learn how to avoid death by PowerPoint, I think you felt that you've got so much more out of this, and yet there's so much more to get from you. So I would encourage anyone out there that is affected by this and wants to affect other people and not just strengthen your, the foundation of your organization, whether it's your employees, strengthen your leaders in your organization, but also change lives, not just the lives of your people in your organization, but the people that they can touch with what you're able to share. This really is a tremendous opportunity. So definitely check out michalegabriel.com. We'll have the links on the show notes. And once again, Michale, it's just been a complete pleasure having you on, and it's definitely one that I'll listen to and re-listen to.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's been a privilege for me to be on your show.
All right, folks. With that, until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today.